On the 10th day, the Sri Yantra was finally complete. The crew gathered in the center circle, the Bindu of the Sri Yantra, and meditated to celebrate their accomplishment. As the crew approached their camp, which was about 3/4 of a mile from the center of the design, they were met with an unusual cooling breeze. Looking to the southwestern skies, they watched as a rare thunderstorm moved into the basin directly over them and the Sri Yantra. What happened next would change everything, but as Bill would say later, it was nature's way of completing their work.
A storm moved in just over Mickey Basin. Now, that's the weird part. It does happen you get thunderstorms out in the desert like this. You do. I mean, I've spent time out there. This happens. But this dumped, I would say, between 3/10 and 5/10 of an inch of rain in maybe 20 to 30 minutes at the most, and just in Mickey Basin.
It's just like nature opened up and poured, cleaned everything out of the desert. And after spending 2-3 weeks working hard, dusty, dirty on the earth, it was a really special experience to be in that rain. The thing I didn't realize or didn't understand about the rain was it was going to wash away all traces of us. And that's really what it did. The rain came down, all the footprints, everything, all the signs that we'd been there and worked for the past couple of weeks on this project were cleared away by the rain.
It completely melted, dissolved the surface, and then by evening it was dried off. When that happens, when that much water comes on the playa, it melts everything, cracks, everything disappears, it becomes smooth, and then it dries out. Then it gets shiny. It gets highly reflective, and it was that way, highly reflective, and there was not a footprint, there was not a crack, there was not anything. It was like this painting got glazed. So when it got washed by the rain, quite honestly, for all of us who were there, that was nature telling us, you're finished and I'm taking care of it from now on. But we weren't the only ones who saw it or who were tickled. I stopped at my rancher friend at Man Lake Ranch, and I stopped and said hi to he and his wife. And he said, "Witherspoon, I don't know exactly what it is you're doing out there, but I want you to do it on my land. I want that rain." And I asked him if there was a chance that he could take me up and I could see it and photograph. I had a couple of rolls of slide film and an old, SLR. So I think it was the next day I came in to the ranch and they flew me up. And we went up to as high as 12,000 feet and then down and got a few good slides, got a few good images. And then I went back in and that's when I just sort of hunkered down in the Bindu for the next 3 weeks or so. Living and meditating in the Bindu was a high point in my life. I can't really describe it. I could say it was profoundly peaceful or deeply spacious and silent, and yet it was really indescribable. Meditating in the different triangles around the Bindu gave different subtle qualities or flavors to the meditation. But in the Bindu itself, somehow, nothing was present, and at the same time, everything was present. And it's hard to honestly say more than that the time was spent there. Maybe this is something of what is meant by transcendence. Whatever, the experiment was successful, And that time in the Bindu became a kind of spiritual benchmark that remains with me to this day. After spending time in the Bindu, I decided it was time to go home because I really wanted to get back to my studio to make some new work. I was charged with a lot of ideas and a lot of things that I wanted to make.
I went to California, picked up the family. We were on a kind of extended vacation. It might have been a week or two before we got back to Fairfield. And meanwhile, everybody else straggled in at whatever pace they did. And we all said, hey, you know, it was really fun being out there, and that was the end of it.
And I got a phone call from somebody out in Oregon. Hey, Witherspoon, is that you? Did you do that? I said, what? And I said, do what? And they then told me that there was something all over the newspaper and Oregonian, and there was all this flap and TV and all this stuff. I didn't know anything about it. And I said, oh, yeah.
I got a call from Bill, and he said, have you seen the news? And I said, no. And he said, well, the Sri Yantra's been discovered, and it's all over the news.
And Tony Lawler was sitting in his, he was making, I think he was in his kitchen, but he had CNN on the tube, and all of a sudden he hears, and in the middle of the Oregon desert is this strange diagram, and he goes, what? And he goes out and looks at it, and there was a picture of our Sri Yantra, and all of a sudden, starting that day or so, it became this big news story.
And then I started getting calls from some reporters and from a professor out of Oregon.
James Deardroff, a retired professor of meteorology from Oregon State University, was convinced it was a government cover-up of an extraterrestrial event. The professor wrote a 16-page article that was published in the California UFO magazine, explaining in great detail why he was sure that Witherspoon and his friends could not have made the design.
He talked to me on the phone and ended the conversation by saying, well, I don't believe you, and this was a government cover-up.
Because it was so big and it was so precise, and it then suggested something that was non-human, alien. And so people didn't want to let go.
And so I talked to Bill, and I told him I don't want to talk to anybody anymore. And apparently the other fellows did do some interviews, but they were reluctant to get involved. We just didn't, we really, all of us that were out there, Bill and all the other fellows, we really couldn't understand what the big hoopla was.
Then there were a whole bunch of newspaper articles starting in the Oregonian in Portland and then going all over the country and even all over the world. Little did we know that this would suddenly become a raging controversy. And I mean, we were as flabbergasted as anything. And I remember there was the one side of it said that only aliens could have made this, like human beings couldn't have made this. And I remember saying to Bill at some point, I said, let's be aliens. Let's like play this for all it's worth. Let's milk this for and have a really good time with this. Bill was more serious and didn't want to do that. And so, okay, so we won't do that.
I think one of the biggest challenges to truth and people accepting truth and recognizing truth is so-called confirmation bias. That is that once I believe something, the only evidence that I'm really going to put a lot of stock in is evidence that supports what I already believe. And so I'm either going to ignore any evidence that suggests my original belief is incorrect, or I'm going to look for holes in that argument. I'm going to look for ways to refute that truth because that new information threatens what I already believe.
With almost no evidence at all, they were all the way to aliens and not believing us when it wasn't actually that difficult to do it the way we did it.
Right.
I understand where confirmation bias comes from, and I think that we're all guilty of this to a certain extent because the world is a really complicated, messy, sometimes anxiety-producing place. And so I think that we want to sort of feel safe. And so figuring out which box to put something in and keeping things in that box makes the world a bit more safe for us, I think, and makes our lives a little bit easier.
That's always my example, or that's what taught me that if people really want to think some way, any amount of evidence or common sense or none of that enters in. It's
agree.
like
I learned that lesson too.
The story was never really told properly. It was always told through the eyes of the news organizations, reporters that were really sensationalizing the issue. I think to some extent, to build the story, and it was a mystery, it was an exciting mystery, but to build the story, a lot of folks who really didn't know what they were talking about were called in as experts to represent this design.
we were back in Fairfield, Iowa, a group of us doing interviews for this movie, and Bill thought that maybe this plow, the original plow, was still in his garage in the rafters. And so we went out to take a look and had the camera rolling, and sure enough, there it was. We were really surprised that the actual plow, and we all remembered it had the tie-ons where we tied it onto the ropes and cables, and it was another one of those great discoveries.
When I saw that plow again, my first impulse was, my God, that thing is so rickety. How the hell did we do that?
All of a sudden, we all started talking about going back out to the desert and reliving some of those memories, doing some filming and checking out the whole place again.
And so we kind of mulled that over as we took off and headed back into town.
On September 5th of 2017, we did return to Mickey Basin in the Oregon Desert. Even with the smoky haze from distant forest fires that hung over the mountains, the basin looked much like it had 27 years before. As we reached the place we had camped on the edge of the dry lake bed, we discovered that a part of our journey of creating the Sri Yantra was still there.
No, I mean, I was blown away to see this stuff out in the desert, sitting there like that. I mean, it had been a really, really long time. I didn't even think they'd be there. I figured they'd have dissolved from the weather and the environment. But here they are, and they've got this like kind of cool, weathered look to them, almost furry from all the sun and the environment. But
well, they were up in that high spot in the willows. We put them up in the willows.
Yeah.
That meant that they didn't get washed away, or some of them didn't. Some weren't. Not everything was there. Right. A lot of stuff had washed away.
Yeah.
But there were a few there.
What they were the original sticks that we actually scratched the lines with. And we know they're the real thing because they've got the wires, they've got the grooves that we made in them, groove on top, groove on bottom, and it's got the little screw on the bottom that was actually the marking point. And these were the ones that we used, and this wood's still in pretty fair shape.
It's amazing.
This is a story that I've told people about, but I haven't had the chance to show the pictures to my son. I'm really looking forward to saying, hey, this is me when I was a little guy. This is how I grew up. These are some of the people and some of the experiences that I had the opportunity to participate in. And I think he's going to get a real kick out of it.
Well, it's a thought about completion too, that first of all, we completed our plans and got here. Then we actually did all that work and completed the work of bringing the idea literally down to earth. And now we're in another completion. We're completing a video about this. And who knows what the next completion is. And it makes me think, when your son is 10 years old, you'll bring him here too. And this is how the world keeps going. It's a good thing.
The multidimensional significance of the Sri Yantra, created by artist Bill Witherspoon and his team, may have characterized an evolutionary step in earth art. Not only was the symbol and the art object within its desert context worthy as a social, environmental, and even spiritual contribution, but also the unusual events surrounding its discovery constituted a kind of inadvertent performance art, with the media and the general public as participants. Even though this unsigned work of art has been reclaimed by nature's wind and rain over the years, its artistic value was clear in its creation, and now that it is gone, all that is left is the indelible impression of how special it was. Perhaps this creation touched something deep and worthwhile in the public's collective consciousness. Quite possibly, if the traditional understanding and uses of the Sri Yantra are valid, what remains is a subtle influence of peace and harmony in a remote corner of North America. Could any art object hope to do more?